Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight's story is not just another update from the battlefield. It is a defining chapter, a moment that historians will study for decades, and a turning point that reshaped the entire course of the war. This is the battle that decided it. Crimea has been fully retaken, and with that single outcome, the strategic, psychological, and geopolitical balance of the conflict has been fundamentally altered. For years, Crimea stood at the center of everything. It was the prize, the fortress, the symbol, and the red line. Many believed that as long as Crimea remained under Russian control, the war would never truly be resolved. Others argued that retaking it would be impossible without catastrophic escalation. And yet, against expectations, against entrenched defenses, and against years of assumptions, Crimea is now back. To understand why this battle decided everything, we need to go back and understand what Crimea truly represented, how it was defended, how it became vulnerable, and why its loss changes not only the map, but the future of the war itself. Crimea was never just territory. It was identity, power projection, and legitimacy. When Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, it was not merely seizing land. It was sending a message to the world that borders could be changed by force and then frozen into permanence. That annexation became the emotional and strategic foundation of the conflict that followed. Crimea was portrayed as non-negotiable, eternal, and untouchable. For Ukraine, Crimea became a symbol of unfinished history. No matter what happened elsewhere on the front lines, no matter how many ceasefires were signed or broken, Crimea remained the ultimate objective. Every strategy, every long-term plan, and every diplomatic effort was shaped by the understanding that without Crimea, the war could never truly be over. On the battlefield, Crimea functioned as a massive military platform. It housed naval bases that controlled the Black Sea. It hosted airfields that enabled strikes deep into Ukrainian territory. Missile systems stationed their threatened cities hundreds of kilometers away. Logistics hubs in Crimea sustained operations across southern Ukraine. As long as Crimea was held, Russian forces retained strategic depth and operational freedom. This is why Crimea was defended so heavily. Layer upon layer of air defenses were installed. Coastal missile systems guarded the shoreline. Naval assets patrolled surrounding waters. Ground forces were entrenched behind prepared positions. Supply routes were designed to sustain prolonged defense. The peninsula was turned into a fortress, and for a long time it appeared to be working. But fortresses are only as strong as their supply lines, their morale, and their adaptability. The battle for Crimea did not begin with a dramatic assault. It began quietly, patiently, and methodically. The first phase was isolation. Rather than attacking the heart of the peninsula immediately, Ukrainian strategy focused on making Crimea increasingly difficult to hold. Supply routes were targeted. Bridges, rail lines, fuel depots, and logistics hubs came under sustained pressure. Each successful strike forced rerouting, delays, and increased vulnerability. The Kerch Bridge, once celebrated as a symbol of permanence, became a liability. Even when partially functional, it could no longer guarantee secure, uninterrupted supply. As supplies became harder to move, costs increased. Every truck, every ship, every convoy required protection. The effort needed to sustain Crimea grew disproportionate to the strategic value it provided. Holding the peninsula began to drain resources that were desperately needed elsewhere. The second phase was attrition. Air defense systems that once seemed impenetrable were systematically degraded. Radar installations were damaged or destroyed. Missile launchers were forced to relocate constantly, reducing their effectiveness. Ammunition depots were struck. Command centers were disrupted. Each loss was not just material, but informational, situational awareness declined, response times slowed, coordination suffered, naval assets were also pushed back. Ships that once operated freely were damaged, threatened, or forced to withdraw to safer waters. The illusion of dominance in the Black Sea began to fade. Control became contested, unpredictable, and increasingly risky. At the same time, psychological pressure intensified. For troops stationed in Crimea, the sense of security vanished. Bases that had once felt far from danger were suddenly within reach. Explosions were no longer rare incidents, but recurring events. Night after night, alarms sounded, uncertainty replaced routine, confidence eroded, morale matters deeply in prolonged warfare. When soldiers believe they are defending something permanent and secure, they endure hardship. When they begin to believe they are isolated, expendable, or forgotten, discipline weakens and cohesion breaks. Families back home felt the shift as well. Casualties mounted. Questions grew louder. Promises of invulnerability rang hollow. Information, even when controlled, could not fully suppress the reality on the ground. The international dimension also played a decisive role. Over time, support evolved. Capabilities improved. Intelligence sharing became more refined. Coordination reached new levels of sophistication. The battlefield became more transparent, more dynamic, and less forgiving for static defenses. Crimea, once defended by assumptions rooted in the past, was now facing a form of warfare designed to exploit rigidity. When the decisive phase arrived, it unfolded with stunning speed. Once key defensive nodes were neutralized, the logic of holding Crimea collapsed. Units faced the prospect of encirclement without reliable resupply. Air cover could no longer guarantee safety. Naval evacuation routes were threatened. Communication lines were disrupted. Commanders were forced to make impossible choices, fight on at enormous cost, withdraw under pressure, or risk total collapse. What followed was not a single moment, but a cascading failure. Positions were abandoned, equipment was left behind, coordination broke down, some units withdrew in disorder, others surrendered when resistance became futile. The fortress that had taken years to build unraveled far faster than anyone had predicted. Crimea was fully retaken. This was the battle that decided it because of what came next. First, the strategic map changed overnight. Without Crimea, Russian forces lost their most critical southern hub. Logistics across southern fronts became strained. Supply routes lengthened and became more exposed. Missile coverage shrank dramatically. Ukraine gained operational freedom along the coast that had been impossible before. Ports regained importance. Trade routes became more secure. The Black Sea, once dominated by force, entered a new phase of balance. Second, the psychological impact was enormous. For years, the narrative had been that some gains were irreversible, that once territory was taken and fortified, it was gone forever. Crimea's retaking shattered that belief completely. It proved that even the most symbolically and militarily significant positions could be reclaimed. This changed morale across the entire front. For Ukrainian forces, it validated years of sacrifice and persistence. It reinforced belief not just in survival but in victory. For opposing forces, it introduced doubt at every level. If Crimea could fall, what else was vulnerable? Third, the political consequences were immediate. Domestically, the loss of Crimea was a shock that could not be easily explained away. It challenged years of messaging and justification. It raised fundamental questions about leadership, strategy, and the true cost of the war. The emotional weight of Crimea made its loss uniquely destabilizing. Internationally, leverage shifted. Crimea could no longer be used as a bargaining chip. The premise of frozen gains collapsed. Negotiations, if they occur, now begin from a different reality. Allies reassessed timelines. Neutral actors recalculated positions. the war's endgame entered a new phase. For Ukraine, the retaking of Crimea reshaped the future. It strengthened unity. It reinforced legitimacy. It changed the psychology of what was possible. Objectives that once seemed distant now appeared achievable. The war was no longer defined solely by defense, but by momentum and initiative. Yet, it is crucial to understand that this moment does not mean the conflict is automatically over. History shows that decisive victories often lead to dangerous transitions. The loss of a cornerstone can provoke restraint, or it can provoke escalation. It can force negotiation, or it can harden positions. The period following such a turning point is often the most unpredictable. What is certain is that the war after Crimea is not the same war as before it. Defensive lines elsewhere are now under scrutiny. Resources must be redistributed. Assumptions must be re-examined. Every actor involved must confront a new reality shaped by the outcome of this battle. This is why analysts call it the battle that decided it. Not because it ended everything instantly, but because it redefined everything permanently. Crimea's retaking demonstrated that modern warfare is not just about numbers or firepower. It is about adaptability, intelligence, logistics, morale, and endurance. It showed that time can work for those who use it strategically. It reminded the world that even entrenched conflicts can pivot on moments that once seemed unimaginable. As the dust settles, the full consequences will continue to unfold. Political systems will react. Military doctrines will adapt. Alliances will adjust. The ripple effects will extend far beyond the peninsula itself. But beneath all the analysis, one truth remains clear. This was the battle that decided it. Crimea is fully retaken, and because of that, the future of the war and perhaps the region itself has been irrevocably changed. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next update.